distinguished educators, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good day to all of you who are present today in the Royal Malaysian University Debating Championship 2023. First of all, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Abdul Afiq bin Lasila, and I will be the speaker for this round. Without further ado, let us begin our debate session now. I will start first by introducing all the debaters that will share out their arguments and suggestions on today's motion. Representing the government's team, I would like to welcome Mr. Khailesh as the Prime Minister, Ms. Shah Ashita as the Deputy Prime Minister, and Ms. Maisara as the Government Whip, and the reply speech will be delivered by Ms. Shah Ashita. Next, representing the opposition's team, I would like to welcome Mr. Junaid as the Leader of Opposition, Mr. Yalin Tran as the Deputy Leader of Opposition, Mr. Yuganesh as the Opposition Whip, and the reply speech will be delivered by Mr. Yalin Tran. Ladies and gentlemen, I will now introduce the distinguished adjudicators for this round. Please welcome the Chief Adjudicator, Mr. Declan, the second adjudicator, Mr. TJ, and the third adjudicator, Ms. Lori. Ladies and gentlemen, I am pretty sure that all of you have understood the ground rules for every debate session. However, please allow me to humbly remind all of us of the rules and regulations that need to be adhered to as follows. During the debate, please silence your mobile phone or any device that may produce disturbing sounds. For substantive speech sessions, the bell will ring once at the first, at the 6th minute. At the 7th minute, the bell will ring twice. For the reply speech session, the bell will ring once, at the 3rd minute, and twice at the 4th minute. Ladies and gentlemen, please be informed that the motion for today's debate is: this House prefers a world where individuals do not fear death. To open the debate, I would like to call upon the Prime Minister for the government team, Mr. Khailesh, to propose the motion. Please welcome.
Can I start? Right. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Chair, people know live, life, and love, but we are telling that live, love, and death. What does this actually look like? The burden is simple from GOV. We tell that to prove that when the world where people do not fear death is much better than whatever opposition wants to claim. How does the world look like, and what is the process that will look like? We're telling that people will not worry about tomorrow. The problem is they won't be hyper wary about the decisions that have been made by every single second in their life. The moment you do not fear death, you will actually think about the life as it is. You'll actually make sure that you savor every single decision you make into life, because you do not have a death as a fear factor. Because in our world, what will happen then is a lot of the death, people would not actually see the death as the prerequisite for every single decision that they make. In our world, we think that it will be much likely less. Then limitation doesn't really manifest in our world. So what does that mean culturally, and where does this fear come from? We're telling it is culturally, religiously debuted. This is where the childhood inculcation happens, that where we are all gonna die one day. This is where the fear mongering of death that has been utilized by the religious people, that has been utilized by the religious organization, that has made sure that we all have to do, because there's an afterlife that we have to worry about, and that exactly is a bigger problem we need to worry about. They do not think about the selflessness of life as it is as now. They will think about what will happen after that and what it is exactly a much better thing we need to focus about it. And that's what we are trying to mitigate in our side. Then life becomes temporary means you have a constant need to prove yourself to others. You think that death is an end goal rather than a journey in your life. You'll think that the world is where the thinking will become a bit where in a world where the fear of death is there, you think that assume death is everything. You'll be more selfish, where you preoccupy every single decisions about life and death situation, and you do not understand that life goes on from whatever it means. And also, what does our world look like and why is it better? Because number one, with people who don't fear death, they will try to live their life fulfilling. They will think that the life is as saver as it is. They will think that we need to understand that every single decision doesn't compound harm towards death in our side. With that, this goes against the status quo and colonizing superpower. How does that look like? Imagine the Palestinians who fear of their death means they wouldn't go against the Israelites. The people of colonized power means, people who are colonized means, they won't go against colonizers in our world. We'll think that death is just the journey means, even though it against our norms, even though it means that it's against people are actually colonizing and actually taking advantage of our livelihood and all those things, we'll think that the moment you do not fear death, you'll go against them and become a martyr of whatever of the land that you're standing for. Then this is actually what opposition will harm compounds then. We're telling that the moment you fear death, you wouldn't try to be a selfless martyr. You'll try to make sure that every single decision, for example, let's take the Palestine-Israel example. Let's say you're a Palestinian who's afraid of death. You'll try to safeguard yourself all the time as an individual rather than going against the death as a norm, and then you'll think you wouldn't, and the selflessness would not compound where other people, other children, and others' family will be safeguarded. Sure, appear why.
When death is an end goal in life, there is an urgency to live your life fulfillingly, right? And at the point in time when you don't have a deadline, how exactly is that urgency manifesting on your side?
Not this point, that death is an end goal life means they will be more exactly preoccupied and able to be leveraged against bigger people. That's my second argument. I will come to that. Which will mean, what is the argument that comes from in their side? You know, in a world where fear of death is, then fear will be a leverage and fear mongering will happen more likely in their side. What does that mean? We have to understand that will make sure that irrationality compound. There's two sides from this. One from a religious perspective, two from a healthcare perspective, just to illustrate how does it look like. In the religious perspective, when you have a religious leader telling that there's an afterlife, you will most likely will be able to see that there's an afterlife that our religion need to safeguard us. We'll try to make sure that we need to make sure that our afterlife is the best afterlife with that. This is where a lot of extremists believe that it is okay to kill a person of another religion. It's okay to make a lot of compounding harms towards others because at the end, the afterlife is there. In our world, we think that the death narrative is out of sight means religious leaders cannot exploit that fear anymore. Religious leaders would not say that there's an afterlife you need to be afraid of. They'll think about what is important in life at this. The switch of narrative is what exactly missing in the religious world at this point. We do not think about world as how to make world a more cherishful, a most cherishing and most lovable life. We're thinking about how death is gonna make it, how death is there's a need, as what Yugi said, there's a need for people to act onto it right now, and the need is exactly is bad in our side. Second perspective was this: the reason why medical and healthcare utilize the fear of death a lot and make sure they have an excessive demand and paying something that have to be universal right as healthcare have an excessive demand is because of the fear of death itself. That means the moment you're a person who is sick, the moment you have a cancer, you're afraid of death so much that you are willing to give whatever money, how many thousands of ringgit, just so that you can be alive. Not only you are putting yourself into the harms of the cancer or harms of people or harms and being the actual consumer of the overpriced medical healthcare system, you're also going to compound the harm towards your family, where your family has to pay the loans towards it, where your family has to pay every single cent for it, so that you have to fear of death. In our world, the moment you don't fear death, you'll think it's a life of journey means it's okay if you die, we'll do the best. This is where a lot of palliative cares then happen. happens, a lot of people would now making sure you're comfortable when you're at the dying stage, rather than making you look like you're a weak person. And also, this is the reason, the fear-mongering tactic is the reason why United States has actual, they sell insurance of overpriced 101k standard. Because they know the moment you fear life, you will lose your mental faculties. You will be a rational person in your side, and make sure that you do not exactly, you'll actually conform towards their reality as it is. It means that you will no longer be a person of rationale. So this is what opposition cannot say. They say that you will, less likely to be, you will fear of that means you will less likely to be, you will be irrational. No, because people are still sensible. The moment you do anything that's out of your fearless space, you'll still be sensible. You'll still be able to safeguard for life. You'll still be able to think that life is a beautiful thing. I need to safeguard the people around me. With that, I'll end my speech. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. Up next, I would like to invite the Leader of Opposition, Mr. Junaid, to present your arguments. Please welcome.
Just a few seconds. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Fear of death is something that exceptionally defines our life choices. We agree to that. But that doesn't affect every single decision. But the impact that it affects our decision is what impacts longevity of our life, and our impacts are not only decisions that affect us, but decisions that affect people around us as well. Understanding that, we prove to you that decision making and people's lives are better under our side of the world. We win this debate. First, a few rebuttals. First of all, they characterize the world where every decision you make is characterized by whether you fear death. I'm pretty sure I did not fear death when I came to debate at this tournament. It doesn't affect to that extent that it affects every single point of your life that they characterize. That is just a false characterization. The point in time when do you fear death? The point in time you fear death is when you're taking life-altering decisions, or even major decisions that might instantaneously or spontaneously take decisions, whether it's like driving on the highway, taking that over risky rate. That is the point in time you actually start thinking about death. Yes, you of course think about death in normal times as well. When you start thinking, well, I'm going to die. Should I be doing these things? Should I be doing these things? We think that's okay because that is something that is essentially shaping your life and affecting your decisions in a good way. Proving that second to you go to you how like afterlife is a problem, and then that's like why people become more extremist and whatnot, and that's why they want to protect the religion. Understand that the fear of, if you don't fear death, the religion still exists in the same way. The afterlife still exists because death is still existent, which means the afterlife still exists. It's not like you're not going to die, so afterlife still exists. So the point in time the afterlife still exists, people still want to make sure that afterlife is better, regardless of whether you are going to die or not. That's not affected by the fear of death. That is driven by your religious morals and whatnot. So their argument that the only reason you do religious extremism is fear of death is not existent. So, secondly, actually, if you think about it, suicide bombers, they don't fear death. They want to care the afterlife. That's why they take it. If this person cared about his life and had the fear of death, he would not be taking that decision. The fear of afterlife is what caused it, not the fear of death. Secondly, they talk about how like medical demand is excessive and whatnot. Fix the medical system. That is not a problem for this debate. Medical systems being overpriced in America is not based because of how corporate America works. It's not because people fear death. People fearing death is something that is inherent to you, and that is because you care about the people, not only about yourself, but people around you. So even if we take their case that the fear is caused by medical care, I think it's an okay trade-off to take, that you wanting to spend money to save your father, to save your uncle is still a good thing. It's because you care about those people and you want to see them live a longer life. We believe that's okay. Moving on then, they talk to you, what are then our arguments? Firstly, let's talk about the few arguments is that how fear of death is something that is essential in making decisions, not only short instantaneously, but in long term as well. The long term effects will be just taken by my second speaker. But I'm going to talk to you about how technology is objectively much worse under their side of the house, where people do not fear death. Firstly then, fight or flight simulation. Like, understand the fear of death is affecting some things that are taking instantaneously. When you're driving a car fast on the highway and you need to get somewhere fast, the point in time you have fear of death, you don't take that over risky turn, you don't take that over risky overtake and whatnot. That is something that is inherently good, because when you don't fear death and you try to take this risk, you're not only affecting yourself, you're affecting people around you. You might cause a long crash, you might crash into another car, you might kill a family of four. There is a fear of death that stops you from taking those decisions that inherently exists on our side only when you fear death, not on their side. But secondly, not only on the highway or anything, it's like a fight or flight simulation, fight or flight situation. When you're faced with fear in a situation where you might die, whether it's falling off a cliff, just like in a fire, stuck in a fire in a house, this fear of death is what inherently kicks in your adrenaline rush and makes you decisions to ensure that your safety or the safety of the people around you, because you don't want people around you to die. Understand that this clashes with the idea of like Palestinians not fearing death. Understand Palestinians do fear death, but they also care about their other people. That means the point in time they care about other people is the reason why they take their decisions carefully, because they know if they recklessly go out and do these things, they will get much more repercussions much more faster. The things that they talk to you about is going to be much worse. The things that are happening right now in Israel-Palestine would have happened long ago, and the Palestinians would be in a much worse situation if they didn't think rationally and they fear death, and that's why. Secondly then, why is technology actively much worse? Why is it that the DC-10 was taken out of the service? It's because people feared death. People would not get on that plane because they knew it was a death trap. And that is the reason the DC-10 was discontinued. Understand that the safety features is one of the things that drives key technology in around the world. Whether it's your car, the safety bag, airbags that you have, whether it's a plane, when there's multiple 20 different times of safety precautions that these aircrafts have to go through before they come into situation. Or if you talk about motorsport or active entertainment for people, where Formula One introduces safety feature after safety feature. The Halo, which has saved so many lives of drivers in the past 10 years since it's been introduced. It is something that is inherently present in our world, where you fear death, where the lives of people are valued. Why is it not valued under their side of the house? Understand, right now when you want to sell something, you have to make sure it's safe for people, because people fear death, and if they will not buy it if they know that it is not safe. Under their side of the house, where people do not fear these things, they're okay with buying a car that does not have airbags because it's going to get them faster, or it looks much more flashier. The fact, like the Tesla truck, it doesn't have a safety. It doesn't have enough safety features. In their side, that's why in our side of the house, people are less likely to buy it because they fear for their lives. They want to make sure they are in a car that's going to be safe, saving them in any kind of situation. Under their side, so when they don't fear death, they will be buying these cars, which means it allows for corporate exploitation. How does this happen? Corporates are now no longer bound by having to spend money on safety measures on every single kind of thing. That means they can save so much money not installing that extra safety feature, not installing that extra airbag, not installing extra hydraulic mechanism to ensure the aircraft stays in flight. These things are things that they can cut on their side of the house, because they don't have to worry, because people aren't worried about dying if they get to their places fast. So under their side, all of these harms exist because corporate is then able to cut costs and sell these things, and people will buy these things. What is the impact of this? Is that you have more technology that is inherently unsafe, and there is no pressure to change it because people aren't fearing death. They're like, well, it's getting there faster, so it's good. So what happens on their side, corporates are able to exploit the general people, and they're going to be the ones that die, because the ones that have safety features are going to be more expensive, are only being able to be afforded by richer people. The services, the medical care, even the medical care afforded to them would be less prone to safety measures, because they don't have to be actively caring about these things. So what have we shown to you? We've countered the argument how like they fought on different motions, because medical care being expensive is something that is a problem with the healthcare system. Fear, afterlife fear still exists, and that is what drives. It's not the fear of death. But then on our side, we've shown you how flight or flight essentially affects your decisions in short term, in life or death situations. And this fear of death is something that can save you and ensure you have a longer life. But we've also shown to you why technology is so much worse on their side, and so many more people die because of these lack of safety features. Proud to oppose.
Yeah.
Thank you. Now, I would like to welcome the Deputy Prime Minister from the government team, Ms. Shashta, to continue proposing the motion. Please welcome.
I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. What's the main problem with opposition's role, right? Two things. Firstly, they continuously claim a fulfilling life and claim a meaningful life. I think this is how we debunk this in two ways. Number one, repeatedly, like Kailash has already mentioned it time and time again, people are more pressured to do different things. When you want to live a fulfilling life, knowing that you're gonna like having the fear of death, of wanting to die soon, you'll often be pressured to do a variety of things and different things. Meaning that there's a high likelihood for you to do multiple different things quickly rather than actually peacefully experiencing it. Meaning that what this will actually like lead to is a second thing where this means you have to continuously work like 24/7, or you have to continuously pressure yourself, push yourself down in order for you to make these experiences to actually manifest in your life. So when you actually fear that and you want to experience things as fast as you want, as quickly as you can, you'll often like put yourself through like hardships and amount of torture to enable for that to happen. And if you're like talking about like the fulfillment of life, I think this is where like Gulf takes this like clash, because we tell you that the fulfilling of life where you can actually experience things one by one to actually things that you want to do is way more likely in our world, because you're not pressured to do multiple different things at once and push yourself and pressure yourself to like succumb to what society is saying by like wanting to do these things. Now, secondly, there is a repeated misconception from side opposition of what our world looks like, right? Now, just because you don't fear death doesn't mean you're willing to die all the time. I think there's a distinct difference between these two, because firstly, people are sensible. Just because like if you like even if you were to buy their example of like wanting to buy a Tesla truck with no airbags, even if you don't die, you will be like injured and you have to live life with that injury. So automatically people are sensible enough to make decisions that ultimately benefit their life, because when you don't fear death, you want to make the most out of life. So you will make decisions that are actually smart and that are actually like not stupid. Number two, they talk about there's an increase in expectation, where they talk about how these corporations will eventually exploit and will eventually come up with this like weird safety reasons. I think this is such an extreme argument coming from like opposition, because you have to understand, number one, legal framework exists, people want to maintain standards, corporates won't just simply like lower their standards because people don't like fear death. I think this is completely absurd coming from them. Number two, they talk about suicide bombing, where they drew a comparative of as to how like the Palestinians fighting for Israel's because they don't fear death versus suicide bombers is equally the same. I think in their world or in our world both equally, suicide bombers will exist because extremism exists regardless. So even if you fear that and you don't fear that, you have a motivating factor of religion and your own personal purpose where suicide bombing will happen. Number three, they were okay to take the trade-off of exploitation by like the medical industry. This is what I don't understand. They're not okay with corporates exploiting them, but they're okay to take the trade-off of like another medical industry exploiting them. So this is where they contradict their own case, where they're accepting some form of exploitation and not the other form of exploitation. Now, we will already tell you, there's a vivid reason as to why they cannot take this exploitation. They can't take that trade-off, because number one, when you take this trade-off, you're basically saying that I fear death, so make money out of my make money out of my fear. They're also telling, and this is where it's bad, because you're allowing for people to actually take control of your life. Because eventually, when fear becomes your thinking process or the core of your thought process, eventually you are telling people every decision you make will be conquered by it. So therefore, when you're allowing exploitation to happen, medical exploitation happens, or any corporate exploitation happens, you're allowing it in their world, it will further propel to that. Thirdly, they talk about how like people still want to make afterlife better, so anyway, with or without fear, this will actually happen. I think you have to understand that, fine, true, people actually care about afterlife when they actually fear death and whatnot, but you have to understand that in their world there's a rapid increase of extremism, because when you eventually fear death, your whole life will eventually be like dedicated for you to care about the afterlife. So the priority for you to do what makes you happy eventually does not happen when you're focused on like religious things, and this is more likely to happen in their world than in our world. Now, eventually, we talk about like how we have to talk about the scale, because they have repeatedly talked about selflessness and selfishness and whatnot. Eventually, the scale of selfishness is much more higher on their side, and the scale of selflessness is much higher on our side. Why is this so? Because eventually, when you do not fear that, you're more likely to do things for yourself and the people around you. Because eventually, you are doing things that give quality not just you, because you don't have to worry about what if I'm dying, or what if I'm dying and I had to save up a certain amount of money before a certain amount of time. Or so you're more likely that, I'm going to do things for myself, I'm going to do things for other people because I have the time and I don't have the fear to do it. Yeah, quick one.
A Palestinian warrior goes into war realizing that there's a family for him at the end, and he does not want them to die, right? That's exactly the incentive for you to go into this war. At your point in time, where this person does not fear death at all, he doesn't care if his family dies at the end, right?
No, he's willing to die so that his family doesn't die. So he's selfless because he does not fear death. This is exactly like, this is the core of our case. Where we tell you that you're more likely to do things for other people when you don't care about what happens to you because you're doing for the greater good. So eventually our tangible impacts then become a much better nation where you are more likely to create a peaceful environment for people. This is like done by so many patriots. Number two, there is no external pressure for you to exist and do things that truly make other people happy. Lastly, you're less likely to be exploited by other people because eventually what happens is that you're more concerned about what happens to you. You're okay to take time to make decisions. So the decision making process becomes much better because you don't have the pressure of time to make things happen. Now, eventually, like, the true comparative then becomes about your ability to make decisions. Because at the end of the day, when on our side we tell you that you can make rational decisions, because Kailash has repeatedly talked about the irrationality of fear that happens where you are unable to understand what is the effects of your decision because you just want to make things fast and do good for the temporary life that you live, rather than actually talking about the longevity of and the impacts of decision. So for all these reasons, we tell you that the decision making process is much better on our side. We give you a much better fulfilling life. We tell you there's more selflessness and more net benefit to the entire society and the environment. For all these reasons, I with Gulf.
Thank you, Ms. Deputy Prime Minister. Up next, I would like to invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition, Mr. Yalin Tre, to present your arguments. Please welcome.
Can I get 1 or 2 seconds? So hi, Deputy Leader of Opposition. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. So the way I want to structure my speech is by again rebutting some of the points given by the Deputy Prime Minister, and after that clarifying some of the arguments that we had in those 3 speaks, and after that going on to further substantives from the opposition's case. Now the first problem that I have with something said by the Deputy Prime Minister is saying that they would claim a much more meaningful life on their end of the spectrum, where they say that people wouldn't just do things quickly just because they're going to die. They will do things with a much more meaningful act and a much more fulfilling act. I'll further cover on my case why this is not the case, why this would not be the case, and why actually having a trouble or actually fearing for yourself and actually fearing what's going to happen once you die is actually better for yourself, not only for yourself and those surrounding you. The next point I have is a misconception that the government has with their own case line themselves. They said that just because people wouldn't fear death, that doesn't make people not sensible. People will just make sensible decisions. But wouldn't that make you a person who actually fears death? If you're sensibly making a decision to avoid your own life going away, or your own life slipping from you through incidents or a prolonged way, or at the end eventually death, wouldn't those sensible decisions in that self make you someone who fears death because you're making a decision with death on your mind? So again, when Ob says that, when the government says that people on our will still be sensible, yeah, they're sensible because they would fear death. Another issue I have with them is them unable to understand what we mean by corporate exploitativeness. When there is a global consensus that we don't need to fear that, automatically what happens is the trade-off would become safety. As already explained by my leader of opposition, when there's a global consensus where death can take, when we don't fear that, safety will eventually take the backseat. And who will profit from this? Companies, corporate companies who don't have to fill in safety sheets, who don't have to meet in safety regulations. And when they say that, legal framework will take care of it, again, legal framework changes with the global consensus. We as a society decide today that it's not okay to smoke in airplanes, it's not okay to smoke inside covered rooms because it's a global consensus. We looked at the data and the data indicated that would lead to more cancer, this would cause more cancer. So again, legal framework runs around global consensus
consensus. So when there's a global consensus where they don't fear death, that will indicate that safety would take a backseat. And another big issue I have with what the government is running is, again, the whole case on the healthcare industry. Again, them saying that if people fear death, this would be used as an exploitative manner for the healthcare industry to charge a lot. The only example the example that they give was America. I ask you, why don't you take the healthcare system in Nordic nations? Why don't you take the healthcare system in Malaysia? Why don't you take the healthcare system in other places where the healthcare and insurance companies don't exploit people? Because the nation's legal framework because the nation's legal framework abstains them from it. Healthcare is screwed in America. That's a given. Not because people fear death, but because they don't have a lot of power against big pharma companies. In other nations like the Nordic nations and in other countries where actually government has a hold on the healthcare and there's actually public healthcare, this is not the case. So this is an issue with the healthcare system because there are nations who do it better and they're doing it much more effectively. So this isn't a death issue, this is an American healthcare issue. And another thing they said that the scale of selflessness is higher, and the example they gave was the war and everything. Again, day after day, what do you hear? What do you hear on the media? The IDF, Israelis have killed this many children, have bombed this many places, this many people are missing, this many people are presumed dead. The value for death that is being held in today's global consensus is a large reason why we are forcing Israel to abide by international laws. If you say that, okay, you don't fear death, that should not be accounted for, where would this go? And for your point of saying that, oh no, the soldiers, they don't fear death. They do fear death. But what they fear more is for the death of those around them and the death of a nation. That is why they're actually doing this. I'll take you later. With that, I'll go into points that the op has to bring. The first point that the op has to bring is fear of death affects our long-term decision making. This is where I said that, oh, if we don't fear death, we'll live our life whimsically. We'll live our life to the fullest. We don't have to care about what happens after this. But that's not a proper way to live life. That's a very selfish way to live life if you don't care for the people around you. I'll explain what happens in today's global consensus. I'll explain what happens today where let's say even our parents, what happens is they save up a bunch of money. They work hard and they save up a bunch of money and they don't spend a lot of it. Why? Because they fear death. They know that tomorrow I might not be here, but my children need something to live on. If let's say they don't fear that, they don't save up at all, they just live, they spend how much they want, and the next day they die, they are indirect. What they're saying is, I'm selfish enough to not care about that. I don't care what happens to my family. I don't care if my children starve for the next day because I don't care about that. I don't need to save up for anything. So why? I'll quickly take
one. It just shows the parents are screwed up parents. Second, you are having a misconception between empathy of other people's death and the fear of your own death. Clarify this in your debate, please.
Okay, I will clarify this, but I'll finish my point first in the sense that what you're saying is parents are screwed up parents. Parents who save up for their children are screwed up parents. Again, the reason our parents have a saving to give to the kids is because they fear for their own death. Let's say they die, in today's scenario, in ops world, let's say they die and they fear what happens to their kids. They actually have this fear in the back of their mind. That's why they actually save up. They actually fear death, not only for themselves, but how their death will affect the people around them. And let's say you're going to live in Gov's world, where Gov says you shouldn't fear death. Live your life to the fullest. Don't save up. You don't need to work hard if you don't want to. Don't do these kinds of things. And in that's what Gov's trying to say. What would happen if you're going to create a scenario where parents would not have savings, and let's say they do die, what would their children live upon? Their children would be put in a scenario where they can't live after that. They would have to suffer even more. So wouldn't that make the people in Gov's world much more selfish? And with that, I'll go on to the second point, which the need of fear amongst individuals would rise as they get older, but it would not stay stagnant in ops world. What I'll explain is now what happens is in a scenario where, let's say, the teenagers are growing up. Again, we have to admit the fact that teenagers are more likely to take risks. They don't care about, not to say they don't care about, but they're not as responsible for their own life as as you grow older. Because again, as you grow older, you get perspective about life and all of these things. What happens, and again, for another scenario is teenagers, a lot of the responsibility is taken by the parents. What actually happens is because this younger generation, they don't fear death, you can see them actually acting a bit more recklessly and leading to a lot of incidents. Again, this is just a young perspective. But what happens in Gov's world is they never learn about this fear of death and they never get that perspective. Let's say you're in a car and you get into a near-death experience. A person in ops world would actually realize, oh my God, my reckless driving would cause my death, not only my death, but actually injure others. This is going to be the mindset. But what would happen in Gov's world is if they get into a near-death experience, they don't have the fear of life, they would continue to be reckless and they'll continue to make decisions which would disadvantage their own selves, not only that, and injuring others. This will only come from a girl's world where they would do things recklessly because they have no fear of their own death and they do not realize that how their own death would negatively impact not only themselves and the people surrounding them. With that, I rest my case. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Leader of Opposition. Moving on, I would like to call upon the government whip, Ms. Maisara, to continue proposing the motion on behalf of the government team. Please welcome.
Let me set up my timer first. Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. The fear of death is what makes you survive. That is true in Op's case. But in our case, we believe that expanding that beyond death is where you truly live. Sensibility is knowing that you won't kill yourself trying so hard to live. And our win condition for this case is to prove how lives are made better when you see life beyond death itself. And our true comparative that we are going to prove to here today is to what extent should we really let fear of death limit the ways in which we live? And in order to get into that, I will have to discuss a few things. So first of all, opposition talks about death as this end goal. They ask themselves, how are we going to live life without this sense of urgency? And in our case, we say that death happens on both sides. The only difference between Op's world and our world is that this urgency doesn't make us desperate. It doesn't make us stressed. It doesn't make us pressured to push ourselves beyond our limits. We recognize that life is not a race, so you can live more comfortably as a result. Secondly, they talk about how major decisions happen, like people only really think about death when major decisions happen. However, on our side, we believe that death still affects us on the daily. It manifests as this desperation to survive. It manifests as corporations trying to take advantage of your life. They will try to make a problem into things that make you feel like you're going to die if you don't take it. And when it comes to the medical industry, the same thing happens. And even in religious industries, religious groups, where they feel like if you die without completely fulfilling all of these things, you're going to suffer as a result, and that only adds to more pressure and stress when it comes to living. And I believe that opposition was pretty uncharitable when they talk about suicide bombers and the way that they will kill people when that happens. However, on our side, there are also good people who are willing to die for their country, for their people, for the perpetuity of their culture. Because on our side, we believe that death isn't just limited to the self. Death is not the end for us. We are more than this world, and this world will live on. Our people will live on, and they can build upon what we have died to create. And as a result, and what happens on their world is that they may be too afraid to die and get their freedoms in the first place. Many soldiers have died in order to make sure that their sacrifices mean something. And by acknowledging that death is what was required to gain these freedoms, we get a more positive we gain a more positive image of it. We celebrate death, and we see it as a positive thing that allowed for the lives of others to get there in the first place. And when it comes to when they talk about exploitation, the opposition really claims that they're okay with the exploitation that happens in the medical industry. We're not with corporate exploitation, where it's true that safety precautions, the fear of death does create fear of safety precautions. However, on our side, when we don't have the fear of death, we want to live life to the fullest. We want to live a long life that is comfortable, that is where we can take our time and we can safeguard it. Because at least in our world, we will kill ourselves to live life, and we will ensure that our family gets to live a good life before they die, and that they are celebrated before they die. That grief will not take them over when they die. And when it comes to, and as a result, the impact that comes from that is that people start living peaceful lives. When people live peaceful lives, life will stop being a race. We have like parents who are more assured that they are cared for, that they are able to provide for their children, and and their sacrifices will be cared for, because the irrationality that fear creates is easily exploited. They don't have to think about how they're not doing enough to provide for their children, and that desperation ends up creating this market, and this market starts making this opportunity to exploit their beliefs. It creates a problem that they feel they need to solve. When if they don't see it as a problem at all, they don't have to sell an overpriced solution to a non-existent problem. Overpriced solutions where people would run out of money trying to provide for themselves and they end up miserable in the first place. Yes.
Is safety within the industry of like vehicle or something a non-existent problem on your side now?
The thing about safety is that we are sensible. We know we care about the quality of life. It's just that when it comes to, it's just that we want to make sure our people, we don't suffer in our lives. Whereas on your end, when you are too scared to live, when your desperation of fear controls you, you start making irrational decisions, like decisions that make you feel like you're doing something wrong, when you're not. You're just living life to the best as you can. And when society doesn't pressure you to live life because you're afraid of death, you're not affected by it. You are allowed to live life as okay as possible. And when an external threat comes against you, you are willing to fight for the perpetuity of your country. And you have people celebrating your death and building upon what you have created. So in their best case, well, it is true that they will take care of themselves. They will have a better sense of preservation. That sense of preservation comes with a lot of stress, a lot of pressure, and they will struggle in the end. However, in our worst case, even if it means more people die, they will die knowing that they have lived meaningful lives and knowing that there are other people. There is a community that celebrates it and doesn't see death as a problem. And with that, I end my speech. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Government Whip. Moving on, I would like to invite the opposition whip, Mr. Yuganesh, to present your arguments. Please welcome.
Take a few seconds. Yuganesh, not here. I'll open the floor for POS after the 5th minute, but if it's very urgent, then yeah, sure. Speak before that. Just a few trigger warnings before I start. There's some controversial topics I suppose that's being discussed. I think the way opposition positioned ourselves in this debate was very simple. In a philosophical debate, we need to talk about how exactly there is a need for you to fear your life and how exactly that changes from not only yourself as an individual and how it affects the community as well as the industries that are based off of these human populations that exist within this world, right? We think on their side of the world, from the very get-go, how their world looks like, right? They've already clarified to you that there's no fear factor towards this death and there's no need for you to prep for tomorrow. These are exact words coming from their prime minister's mouth, right? There's no need for them to not worry about the next day, which means I'm not going to sleep anxiously tonight worrying about whether or not I'm going to wake up alive tomorrow. But at the same time, I won't be worrying about how exactly have I saved up. Is there anything that I need to do for my family? Is there anything that I need to do for my own safety? Have I took my meds for my antidepressants? A lot of other things that actually affect your health, which in fact affects your death and the livelihood, right? These are things that just don't exist on their side from the very get-go. We don't see how exactly this is something that's rational, right? First off, let's just look at the idea of them pointing it that there's fear-mongering as a leverage in status quo, right? This comes from two folds, which is on the idea of religious exploitation and then like medical industries taking exploitation, right? On the religious thing, I think they dropped it off the moment that we clarified that there's the right, people still have the fear of the afterlife, right? Sure, at the point in time where like you're gonna die and you get to afterlife, you're not gonna fear death, but death is still imminent. People on your side aren't immortal, so people will still believe in the idea of afterlife if they're religious, right? Even if they're not religious, the idea of being a better person in status quo exists on our side because of how people are going to perceive you and all, right? Other than that, the idea then is that these people still fear afterlife, so that by proxy, they're going to try to be the better person that their religion wants them to do, right? No religion outright tells you to kill people. These are extremists that live on either side. If you're going to say that suicide bombers are extremists and all, sure, we'll trade this off alongside that as well, right? Next thing is on the idea of like medical industries exploitation. We think that first of all, this is an anomalous example that they're taking only US and not talking about like other countries and all. If I can go to a clinic right now in Malaysia and like, heal a wound and I just have to pay like $1, I think that in itself is not some form of exploitation. In the fact that I do fear my death at the point in time I'm entering into this medical facility as well, right? Even if not, right, I'll just try to be charitable and say that this is a significant harm of people being exploited in status quo because your fear of the life and being something that's monopolized. We said that we were flipping this argument and saying that like people on their side are going to be exploitative on the facts of industries, not making sure that the legal framework exists to make sure that there's safety bags in your cars, right? Food safety won't exist because why would you care about the safety and the quality of the food going on? As much as it's like food, better tasting and it's cheap, people don't care how exactly this is going to affect their life because you're not fearing cancer, because you're not fearing death. Sure.
Fear of death doesn't connote that you lack sensibility, you lack mental faculties, you lack rationality. I do not fear death. Doesn't mean I'm going to jump off the window at this point. Clarify the debate, please, for God's sake.
The sensibility of someone who wants to be the best rock climber in their life is to make sure that they take, a few toning exercises to make sure that their body is capable of being a rock climber. Why exactly is one taking the toning exercises to become a better rock climber? It's because they don't want their hands to slip off, they don't want to have a cramp in the middle of climbing a rock, and they don't want to fall for their death. A gymnast practices every day because they don't want their bodies to go through harms which would inevitably cause them to die earlier, and that's why they retire at a very young age. These are a lot of things that people do sensibly because they fear what might happen in the after effects of these consequences you're taking, right? Then right, they also claim that like just because these people won't be like irrational and all. If you're in a near-death car experience, people on our side are going to slow down the next time they're in places that might potentially cause a near-death car experience again. Why? Because I don't want to die. I think on their side, sensibility comes into you saying that like, okay, I made a mistake the last time, I'll not make that mistake again. But we don't see why exactly this is a driving factor or an incentive for you to not make that mistake again, insofar that the end goal is for you to not die, right? And that just doesn't exist on their side. Next thing then is that the idea of this fulfilling peaceful life, and there's no need for them to rush, right? Understand that the peaceful life that they were trying to push on their side equates to the lack of urgency. And I've been pushing this from the very get-go from my initial POY, right? The care, the empathy for parents to care, if you're not messed up parents and you care for your children, is to make sure that these people have like, their like basic needs on a daily basis met, right? We're saying that it goes on more deeper than that, on saying that after the moment I die, are my children dependent enough to live in this life, right? Insofar that I'm the sole breadwinner of the family, have I did everything that I can to make sure that my children can live a fulfilling life? Have they had, enough education and like marriage and like, have they like settle down in life, because at the point in time where you do not have these requirements met, you're inevitably going to die, and no one wants to think about their children's suffering at the point in time that they're going to die, right? We think that the empathy to care does not necessitate an urgency on your side, right? So I can still care about my child on your side, but it doesn't come at the urgency, right? You're not going to go out of your way to make sure that your children have insurance, even if it's an exploitative insurance that you're taking. You're not going to go out of your way to make sure that they have like savings and everything that you put out of your own pocket money. So then the idea of these people caring exactly doesn't come from a point where it might happen, but it happens at a very peaceful rate, because you're not fearing the fact that you're reaching 50 and you realize that death is just like right around the corner, right? I assume people die at 50, I don't know when exactly they die. Then the idea then becomes about like this like minor thing happening between like war and like people making sacrifices, right? People make sacrifices because there's something worth sacrificing. At the point in time where you do not care about your life, there is literally nothing on the idea that you're sacrificing. That's why we equated these people to suicide bombers, because these people do not care about their life. We're not saying this from an extremist example. We're saying this on the fact that like if you are someone who is significantly an oppressed community and you're fighting against a bigger person, you know for a fact that you're not going to win. Yet we see from a historical perspective, people still do this. It's not because they do not care for their life. It's because these people know that there are lives that are worth caring for. I do not want my children to live in a point in time where they are fearing, where they are inevitably going to die. I will not be. I am worrying about the livelihood of my community, of the people that are coming beyond my generation. This is why people who are oppressed communities fought in the first place, right? We don't see how exactly this idea is selfish in the hand that like the fear of death is what is causing these people to be selfless, right? People enlist themselves to military not because they don't care for their life, but they care for the people on the ground. So on that, what have we brought in? We've told you how exactly like the fight or flight mechanism is one that's intrinsically important, right? Next on like technological innovations, we've already clarified how there's like no legal frameworks existing to cater to actors who care for safety, insofar that there are no people who care for safety on your side. Unsure as to how then there would be the quality in precedence making sure that there's safety mechanisms in these industries and all, right? And we've also said that like there are long-term decisions. Is it rushing to live a life when you're like in our world? Yes, but I care for my children after the moment I die, right? So these long-term decisions make sense. Oppose.
Thank you, Mr. Opposition Whip, for your speech. To proceed with the next agenda, we will now continue our debate session for this round with the reply speech session. The reply speech shall be delivered first by the opposition team. Therefore, without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Yalindran to deliver his speech and conclude the debate. Please welcome.
So I think the best way for us to look at this reply is by looking at a whole world scenario of what would happen in both worlds, gov worlds and ops world. First, let's look at how an individual will respond or how an individual live their own daily life in gov's world. Again, we do trade off to the fact that yes, their life would be less restrictive. They, not to say would have zero regard for safety or anything like that, but they will have a less restrictive life. They won't be like, oh, I need to save up for the future, I need to take care of all of these things. They won't have those things in the back of their mind. So for some, okay, we would accept they live somewhat of a peaceful life. I wouldn't admit to the fact that they said they would live a life where they can take it easy. Again, let's say there is an individual who wants to be highly accomplished. He wants to do a lot of things in life. Regardless of the fear of death, he would still be running around. He would still have to do a lot of things. Those are kind of the scenarios. But okay, we do accept to a point where in their world, the average person wouldn't have that much fear of, let's say, if I'm going to die or do all of these things in the back of the mind. Comparative to ops world, yes, we do agree. People would have that kind of trouble feeling when they're doing something or they like taking some actions, we do agree. But what we say is having that kind of a trouble feeling, having that feeling that, oh, what happens when I'm gone? Oh, if I'm gone, how would I take care of my family? How would I take care of the people surrounding me? Oh, if I make this decision, how would it negatively impact me? Having this feeling in the back of your head is inherently a good feeling for you as an individual, and we already explained that in the sense that if you don't have that feeling in the back of your head, even if you just want to say I want to live life to the fullest, I want to go fast, I want to go flashy, again, if you have these kind of feelings, we have already explained how it would be easier for tech companies to exploit you, how the region of tech safety would decrease, how having this kind of feelings would give an individual a better response in a fight or flight scenario, how having this kind of a feeling in the back of your mind would actually reduce that reckless philosophy that an individual will have, and how having this feeling in the back of your mind would be better for an individual in long-term decision makings. So that's what we as OP have actually brought to the table. We actually completely agree to the point that having this would be troublesome to you. We do take that trade-off. Yes, having these kinds of feelings, having a continuous feeling in the back of your head of, oh, what would happen? Yes, this is a kind of troublesome feeling, but these are the feelings that make us human. These are the feelings that make us human in the sense that if we fear for our own life, if we actually impulsively take decisions knowing that, oh, I actually have a fear for life, I don't want to live life, even if the trade-off, if I don't get to live life to the fullest, I get to live a life which is satisfactory to my own need and satisfactory to my need to the sense that I have a fear of death. That is actually what makes us human. We aren't all people who want to. If we would not have that fear, that would not make us inherently human at all. If you say, I want to do everything, I don't have regard for safety in my own, I don't have a regard for health or safety or death in my own vocabulary, I just want to do things. These are the things that would not make us human. And that's for the individual comparative. Let's go on to the world comparative and how laws would be different in both Gov and Ops world. We have already explained the scenario where when they ask how would corporates actually exploit this, and we've already explained that if there is a global consensus of death isn't something to be feared upon, this actually would go on to law changes and all of these things. But we do agree to the fact that again in a corporate world, in our Ops world, yes, there will be a chance for, let's say, insurance companies and medical companies to actually might possibly exploit this. The scenario that they gave is actually a one-off scenario. But what we are saying is, if actually we have our own regard for our death and we actually want to live life, and we actually have our own regard for our death, that will actually push us to actually make these kind of changes. Again, we've already given comparative of nations with better healthcare. This is not because people that don't fear death or anything like that. It's because they have a much more comprehensive decision on their own death. And these are the two scenarios that we have debated in this debate. And with that alone, I assume that for an individual to live in Ops world or Gov's world, it would be better for that individual to live in Ops world, because yes, you would have that reckless feeling in the back of your head, but that's what makes you human. Having these kind of feelings for you and having that fear for what would happen to you, that is what makes an individual human. And for that, I rest. Thank you very much.
Thank you to the representative from the opposition team for the reply speech. Now, I would like to invite Ms. Shashita from the government team to proceed with their reply speech and conclude their debate. Please welcome.
Start my speech in 3, 2, 1. This is how I'm going to structure my speech. I'm going to tell you 3 reasons as to why we win and 4 reasons as to why they lose. Firstly, we tell you that first of all, not having the fear of death does not equal to being ready to die. I think this is a very important definition that we've been trying to push right from the beginning, which OP has been completely deaf to. Now, understanding that firstly, just because you have or you don't have the fear of that, it doesn't mean you let go of every value in life. It doesn't mean you let go of morality, intelligence, care for other people, freedom and independence. That basically means crashing into people just because you don't fear that is a morality issue, not a fear issue. Secondly, we explain to you the probability of things happening. Firstly, we talk to you about the probability of irrationality. We tell you that the irrational fear that happens on the other side of the house is much more larger compared to outside. Why is this so? Every talked about, why don't we pick out other medical industries about around the world? Firstly, people in Malaysia who are also getting exploited because people here are also influenced to take out loans and to go to private hospitals for broken fingers and due to the fear of death. The irrationality factor here is that they don't trust government hospitals to better treat them. This is exactly where the decision-making capabilities of these people who eventually fear death doesn't even exist. Secondly, probability of selflessness. Now they've talked about how they gave a very weird example of how if you will more likely be selfless if you fear death because you protect your family. I think this is exactly where my answer to the POI is very important, where we tell you if you are selfless, you will truly rather go and die to protect your family. And the ability to actually do that eventually comes when you do not fear death because you will find the greater good. Now, what does this look like? That means if minorities that fear that wouldn't have even fought against those imperialistic powers to ensure that we have a better nation, to ensure that we live a better life. So eventually what does it bring to? Which side gives you the impacts that matter at the end of the day? Opposition gave you like three impacts I'm repeating throughout the speech. First, they tell you better safety measures. They tell you like better corporations giving you better like airbags and stuff. I think we've already told you again and again. Just because you don't fear that doesn't mean you're willing to die. So just because you don't fear that doesn't mean you'll buy a car without airbags. I think this is something this is a logical linkage that we've explained to you time and time again. Secondly, they talk about economic safety measures. Now, Kailash has pointed out in his POI repeatedly that parents that save up for you and work their ass off and don't like contribute their time and energy to their children, eventually because they fear death, meaning that they make decisions that further impede their quality of life. The meaningfulness in their life is further affected because they care so much about safeguarding themselves economically. On the other hand, on our side, people are still sensible to have food on the table. People are still sensible to take care of their children. I don't see how just because you don't fear that, you let your children starve and you don't protect their future and stuff like so. We have to understand that on a spectrum, sensibility does happen on our side of the house very much more than on their side, because at least now parents make a decision to not continuously be paranoid about what might happen in the unknown and what may not even be determined. On our side, at least they are able to spend some time and make the most out of quality. What are the impacts that we gave you? Firstly, on an individual level, we tell you that you make decisions for yourself that makes you happy, that gives you more meaning, that resonates with you the most. You're not succumbed to societal pressures on what is right and what is wrong. Number two, you can contribute better to nation building. So we told you about how conflicts around the world happen and people fight for their rights only because they are brave and they have the courage. And this courage comes with the lack of fear of death. Thirdly, we also tell you about how the irrationality of fear impedes the decision making in life because it conquers your entire mind. They fail to refute the irrationality of fear that we have continuously pointed. They have never said like the fact that irrational does not happen. They said they in fact concede to it to a certain extent throughout the debate. So in that case, they have also given continuous contradiction as to how legal framework does not happen on our side but happens on their side, and like exploitation, they're okay with exploitation but they're not okay with certain forms of exploitation. So all these contradictions and the like lack of refutement for all these reasons side with Gov.
Thank you to the representative from the government team for the reply speech. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now reaching the end of our session today. Congratulations and thank you to all debaters from both teams for your wonderful, informative and fruitful speech. Thank you so much for your cooperation and for your time spent here in this debate round. We will now give some time to the adjudicators for the discussion of the results. I would like to ask all debaters and audience to wait outside of the room.
Question, do we go back to hall?
We go back to the hall.
We'll wait here. Yes, wait here. Okay.